I'm trying to not use a tumble dryer.
Being aware of things that passively suck energy, like the clock on your stove.
When it comes to our power bills, we can all point the finger at what's to blame. In this case, it's the clothes dryer that's copping it.
Washing on the line, always.
We all have an idea of how we could save a wee bit more.
Like we'd let things build up before we do a load of washing.
Turning off things at the wall, sort of those age-old things that our parents always told us to do.
Kia ora, I'm Katy Gossett and welcome to Thrift. I'm glad you could join me. I'm just popping the jug on. And actually I'm going to put the extractor fan on too. More on that shortly. Now this episode is Energy Efficiency Part 2. In our last step, we looked at more expensive things you can add to your home to cut your power bill. This time it's more about the little personal changes. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "If I cannot do great things, I can do small things in a great way." So if big ticket items like double glazing aren't doable at the moment, there are lots of little things we can do to trim power costs. The first step in this episode is taking a closer look at how we use our small appliances, starting with that cuppa. And something I should have thought about before I even boiled the jug.
We can see on most of our kettles they have a gauge on the side, so if we're only making tea for two, then we only need to fill it as far as that.
Remember, that's Michael Begg from the last episode. He's been teaching people about energy efficiency for 40 years.
Back in the 80s, as electricity prices started to go up, people were finding, oh gosh, my power bills are getting a bit dear, what's wrong?
So the first thing that's wrong here is boiling more water than we need. And of course, the more water there is, the more steam that gets created.
If we're boiling the jug, pop the range hood on for 30 seconds when it's getting towards the boiling stage, because we want to try and reduce the amount of moisture in our rooms.
Also on our bench top,
Microwave ovens, obviously a very, very good appliance used for all sorts of things. They don't use a lot of energy. They're short, sharp and to the point and work really, really well.
They can also be underrated and underused. At this point, Michael casts an eye at my conventional floor-standing oven and notes that in many ways a microwave can be more efficient.
You know, we've got a very big oven there with a really big element in it, and it's quite slow compared to cooking something in a microwave.
Nevertheless, my floor oven is apparently in reasonable shape, despite being reconditioned.
I think as long as the elements, you can see that they're nice and flat, so when you put your pots on there, you're going to get good coverage of them, that your thermostats obviously are all working properly. If the thermostat wasn't working properly, the thing would just go on high all the time.
With older ovens like mine, it's also worth checking that the seals are still good. The same with fridges and dishwashers. And actually, these days not everyone needs a large stove. Michael recommends a benchtop oven for small households.
Because the oven is so small, when you look at the capacity of that, the little oven, I can preheat it to 200 in under 10 minutes.
Now let's not forget the joy of the one-pot meal. Michael really rates both rice cookers and especially slow cookers, which again he thinks are underused here in Aotearoa.
I heard that in the States, for example, most homes would have at least 2 slow cookers, and they are very, very good because they use hardly any power at all.
Now to the dishwasher. Most of us only put our dishwashers on when they're absolutely chocker, and we can also take advantage of cheaper electricity tariffs.
Our big thing is our company gives free power from 9 to 12. So, okay, it's 9 o'clock, turn on the heat pump, dishwasher go.
It's worth checking those deals out, and then using a timer or delay switch to run your dishwasher or the much maligned dryer when power's cheap.
Put clothes in the dryer if they need to go in there. You know, everything gets turned on at 9 o'clock.
If you have to use your dryer and you don't have cheap power, try to partially dry the clothes earlier in the day in the sunshine, or make sure they've been well spun during the washing cycle. A dry towel in the load will also help it work faster. And just before we move off this topic, it's worth noting one other large appliance that sucks a fair bit of power.
I remember going into a property in Rangiora.
Michael's often called upon to get to the bottom of electricity sapping mysteries.
This chap just said, I can't work it out. My power bill is $20 dearer than my neighbour's. We both have the same number of people in the homes, the same sort of appliances.
It's a whodunit that Michael's solved before.
I knew what it would be before I even went in the door. I said to him, can I have a look in your garage? He said, why?
They go into the garage, and before your imaginations run wild,
there's an old fridge freezer.
Yes, it's that great Kiwi tradition, the beer fridge.
And an old fridge freezer can cost as much as $200 a year to run.
Michael's seen some garages with 2 or 3 fridges or chest freezers. Now that's all well and good if those freezers are packed with produce you've grown or meat you've hunted. But in this case...
In the fridge there was a 6-pack of beer, and in the freezer there was nothing.
Now at this point I start to feel a bit uncomfortable. I think you know what's coming. I need to tell you now I've got a guilty secret, not that we're going to bother going to the garage, but there is a beer fridge out there that probably doesn't have a whole lot in it. Which, combined with the fact that it's our old kitchen fridge, makes it doubly bad.
The older ones are using a lot more electricity. The less in them, the more energy they use.
In fact, our beer fridge is really only full in the summertime when we have Christmas, so pavlovas and drinks, but I thought I'd check out what other people do. You have a beer fridge?
Yeah. Goes without saying, doesn't it?
Turns out he has 24 bottles of lager.
House fridge has food in it, beer fridge has beers in it.
But when I delivered the news about fridges that aren't full using more energy, you happy with that?
As long as it keeps the beers cold, yeah. So what you're saying to me is I need to fill it right up.
You didn't hear that from me.
I might just have to do that.
Instead, Michael says look out for a newer, small bar fridge with an energy efficiency star rating. Now for our next tip, which is all about moving furniture around within your house for maximum performance. So thinking about that fridge, make sure you put it in the right spot, because one thing Michael does see in modern homes,
They have the refrigeration in a spot that gets a lot of sun onto it. So sunshine on an appliance is just going to create a higher energy use.
other parts of the house, like the bedrooms, often get less sun. So think about who's in those cooler spaces.
If you've got somebody like a child that isn't well, or an elderly person, or somebody with respiratory problems, try not to put them in the bedrooms that are on the south side of the house, because they're always going to be the coldest.
Ideally, keep your beds away from external walls that are often uninsulated. Try an internal wall instead.
I always recommend having the bed head up against an internal wall. Just can stop issues such as mould and cold occurring.
But depending on space, if you have to go against an external wall, pull your bed slightly away from the wall.
Having the mattress, and a base right up against the wall, again, I've seen mould occurring along the back of it. But if we look down there, we can see that there's certainly no signs of mould.
Please don't look down behind the bed. You'll find a pile of dust, probably.
Hey, that's just home, isn't it?
And if your house is damp, think about how that moisture gets in there, and don't add to it, as I sometimes do, unwittingly. How? Well, we've heard that dryers suck up a bit of power, but what's the alternative? We chuck our clothes on a rack and leave them inside to dry.
We get home and that washing may be dry, but where's all the moisture out of that washing gone?
Well, we know from our last step that moisture stays hovering in the air, especially if it's a warm room. We then need to ventilate the space, or better yet, just dry our clothes outside. Michael's got a wee story about this. Once upon a time, he assessed some flats. Picture 2 homes side by side.
They were the same size, they had the same heating, the same ventilation systems.
And yet,
one was lovely and warm and dry, and the other one was cold and damp.
it sounds like a children's story where different characters make very different choices.
This little lady would ventilate properly, didn't dry her washing inside. This older chap next door would never open a window, would dry his washing in front of the heater all the time.
And just like a fairy tale, there's a clear moral to the story.
Hers was warm, dry, healthy, wasn't costing her a lot of money to heat. His was cold and damp, and he never felt warm in it.
We can assume he got some tips from Michael and a happy ending into the bargain. So once you've tweaked your appliances, moved some furniture, put your washing outside where the sun does shine, tip 3 is about the single biggest user of household power.
Well, on an annual basis, it's hot water, because hot water is being used 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year.
In fact, Community Energy Action says up to 30% of our power bill is hot water. So how much does, say, a 10-minute shower cost? Well, some electricity consumer websites reckon around 66 cents. Others say up to $1.55. And we've all got different power rates, so Michael's reluctant to put an exact figure on it. But he can tell you right away, and many of you will know this.
It's a lot more efficient to have a shower than it is to have a bath, obviously.
And in general, he does believe.
Most people can really get in and out of a shower in about 5 minutes.
Now, if you find all of a sudden that your power bill has shot up and you don't have a bare fridge in your garage, a good place to start looking for the problem is at your hot water cylinder. Some cylinders have a valve that can get blocked, and that means the element could be running 24 hours a day, or you could get a leak under the floor. Another thing worth looking into is the pressure in your cylinder.
If you've got a high pressure cylinder and you've got an ordinary shower head, the flow rate from that shower head can be quite high. Now, I have measured some that have had flow rates of 30 litres a minute. So in a 10-minute shower, there's 300 litres of water gone.
So how can you tell what kind of flow rates you have?
All you need to do is get a bucket. On the inside, you'll see it's actually got marks, 1 litre, 2 litres, and measure the flow rate of that shower head, just set on normal and see what it is.
I'm giving this one a go myself, so I'm timing the flow for 15 seconds.
Fill's 1 litre, you times that by 4. Obviously 15 seconds times 4 is 1 minute, so you know it's 4 litres a minute.
And what should it be?
Around 10 to 12 litres, 8 to 10 to 12 litres is fine. It's if it's above that, if it's 15 to 20 or even as much as 30, then you need to address that.
My shower flow worked out at about 8 litres a minute, so that's okay. But if yours is faster, there's a simple fix available.
You can put an energy efficient shower head on there, which will cut it back to about 10 litres a minute.
But if you're like me and you want that extra bit of time under the hot water, first of all, look at what's the size of your hot water cylinder.
With night rates, my recommendation is for up to 2 people, you can get away with 180 litre. For a family of 4, you really need to be going to 270 or 300 litre.
The good news is that new cylinders have very hot water to prevent bacteria from growing. The water then has to be mixed with cold at the tap, and that makes your water supply go a bit further.
That 300 litres of water, by adding a little bit of cold water to it every time it comes out of the cylinder, is more like having about 400 litres of water available to us. So you can get away if you've got a 300 litre cylinder, you're having an extra 5 or 10 minutes in the shower, you're not running out of water, your power bills aren't going through the roof.
And it's a little treat on a cold day.
We've got to have some comforts. And I know my wife likes a longer shower than I do, but that's not an issue.
Now, a quick recap. If you're planning to sit down with a cuppa, consider just how many cups you or your guests will drink and only fill the jug with the amount you need. If, of course, you now fancy something stronger from the bare fridge, consider how much that fridge is costing you and maybe upgrade to a more efficient one. Chuck a PAV in it at least, or something else to justify the power use. Try as often as possible to chuck your washing outside to dry, and consider moving things around, appliances, furniture within your house to get the most efficient use out of each thing. And like me, try and take a shorter shower. Next time, savings accounts. We met a first-time saver who's got herself out of debt and has some good tips she's now passing on to her children. For that episode and others, you can follow and listen on your favourite podcast app. Special thanks to my guest in this ep, Energy Efficiency Advisor Michael Begg. This podcast was produced and presented by me, Katy Gossett, engineered by Alex Harmer, and Tim Watkin is the executive producer of podcasts and series. If you have a tip for us, you can email thrift@rnz.co.nz.